Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our studies through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We're in the Calamus section, and we turn now to a little poem, A Promise to California. We're going to see here Whitman as the educator or the politician, the pedagogue, as we have spoken about him in prior lectures. Think about one of the great disappointments of Whitman's life is that he never made it to California. It's mentioned a number of times in Leaves of Grass. We'll have this 3 times California mentioned in Song of Myself, twice mentioned in Children of Adam, and 7 times California mentioned in the Calamus section and beyond. And yet he never made it there. And in 1879, as we've said in our biographic information in earlier lectures, Whitman made it all the way to Denver, very, very close to where we live out here, but he never made it to California. And I think it was one of the great mishaps of his life that he never was able to actually make it there. Now, the assumptions for us, I've already mentioned in prior lectures, is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down the left-hand side, everything from inscriptions to including We Two Boys Together, the poem that we just worked with. Our Norton study for background information will tell us that the manuscript of this Calamus number 30 makes no mention of California. The first line reading of the original poem, quote, a promise to Indiana, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Minnesota, and others, end quote. Nor is there any mention in the text of, quote, robust American love, end quote. The poem took its present title in 1867. Now let's turn to the poem. It's not a very long poem, as most of these poems at the end of Calamus are, but I think there's a lot going on here. A promise to California, or inland to the great pastoral plains and on to Puget Sound in Oregon, sojourning east a while longer, soon I travel toward you, to remain, to teach robust American love. For I know very well that I and robust love belong among you, inland and along the western sea. For these states tend inland and toward the western sea, and I will also. Now, again, I think this poem begins powerfully with this word promise. I think, though, when you hear Whitman talk about this word promise, he really means challenge more than promise, right? That is to say, I'm challenging you. He'll say in passage 46, 47, I dare you to be a bold swimmer. You'll remember this idea of daring or challenging is, I think, encased in this word promise. He says a promise to California, that is to say, as far west as one can go. Or, and then he'll use this term inland. Remember, that was the last line of Prairie Grass, a poem that we've already seen, to the great, and then he loves this phrase, pastoral plains. Notice plains are capitalized. Obviously, we're talking Nebraska and Kansas and the like. And then on to Puget Sound. It's interesting that he doesn't mention Washington. Go back or take a look at Song of the Redwood Tree, passage 2, to see how he plays around with that idea of Washington. Sound and Oregon. We'll see Oregon in Song of Myself, passage 39. And then he'll use this term sojourning, which, as we said, is foundational to the way Whitman thinks about Leaves of Grass. It is a poem about taking journeys, and of course here we'll join it to Homer, right? Sojourning east a while longer, and then he uses the word soon, and this is probably the heartbreaker of the poem, right? I travel towards you. But of course Whitman, for all of his talk of travel, much like Keats, never really did much traveling. You'll remember that in 1848 he's in New Orleans. We mentioned the Denver trip of 1879, and then finally took a trip north to Canada in 1880, and that was the extent of his traveling outside of the area of the New York, Manhattan area. Sojourning a little while soon, I travel toward you to remain, and we wonder if he ever got out there, would he have stayed? It's a hard argument. I think Whitman always knew that he was the poet of Long Island, and yet I think if he could have made it as far west, he might have found himself out there a while. He says he would have remained. And then why is he there? To teach. Again, Whitman, the educator. I think it's an oversight to not remember that Whitman began as a public school teacher in a one-room schoolhouse, and I think he remained that all of his life. I think that was the point of all of his journalistic activity, and I think in his poetry, as well as in Leaves of Grass, his publishing of the poems over and over again. He was trying to teach something. What is it he wants to teach? Notice, It is this word robust. We've seen this a number of times in Leaves of Grass. And then American, and I told you, when he uses the word America or American, you want to sit up and pay attention. I hear America singing from the inscriptions chapter section. We don't see the word used a tremendous amount in Leaves of Grass. It's a special word for him. And then, of course, the word love. And then he'll end the last two lines with the word for. For I know very well that I and robust love, notice the repetition of the word robust, belong among you. He's speaking, what, to California, maybe to all of the states, to America. And then he uses this word inland one more time, where he imagines the eastern seaboard is where he lives, and then inland is everything to the west, culminating obviously in California. Excuse me, and along the western sea. Of course, he never got to see it, tragically. To finish the last line, back to the word for these states tend, I think it's an important word in this poem, inland and toward the western sea. And I will also. It is, I think, for Whitman, this tending, this general kind of feeling of dimensions and growth. We've seen it before in a number of poems of Leaves of Grass, and I think this word tending is a central word. What are we going to say about a message here at 2A? Well, obviously, he sees America as the robust, always evolving. And for Whitman, that was what made America the great poem, the great epic poem. It was always evolving. At 2B, I think word choice here is quite fascinating. To ask a question like, why did he use Puget Sound and not Washington? Washington is something most of his readers back in the New England area would have known, but not Puget Sound. And yet that's the one that he chooses, right? And again, only 2 times Puget Sound is used in all of Leaves of Grass, this being one of them. At 3A, well, obviously we think again of Twain and his celebration of the West. I also want to think about Steinbeck here, and the ways in which Steinbeck, I think, was very influenced by Whitman's celebration of California. We think of Grapes of Wrath, we think of Mice and Men. We've given lectures at Armstrong.net over both of those titles. Finally, at 3B, I think to own a poem like this is a good question to ask. Do you feel America is still robust, still growing, or is it now beginning to shrink, to become more static? I hope that you'll be challenged by a question like that. Whitman would hope that, of course, you would still see yourself and America as robust. Thank you.